Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is amazing women in world history. Starting with Catherine the Great of Russia. Oh man, what a life! What an incredible person and woman. She was the Tsarina, or Empress, or Queen of Russia, from 1762 to 1796. You know, the Russians only have two leaders designated as great, and Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. So she's one of those two, considered one of the top two leaders in Russian history. And here she was a woman, and the thing is, she was German. She was not Russian. Fascinating story. Back then in the old days, 1700s, the countries of Europe were ruled by kings and queens, royal families, and they married amongst each other. So she was from a German. Germany was not united. She was from a German state and a royal family, and she married into the Russian royal family. And her husband was going to be, when they got married, he was the heir. He would be the next czar. But he was a bad guy. He was selfish and cruel and lazy and bad guy, and he did not love her at all. And so she had hard times. She moved from her German state to Russia, I believe St. Petersburg, and then and she had these tough years. She was lonely, away from home, away from her culture, from her people, her family, and a husband who didn't care for her and did not love her and mistreated her. And he was kind of a crazy guy. I think his name was Paul. She'd be in bed trying to sleep, and he would have these toy soldiers on the bed, and that he would be playing with, and on top of the blanket, and she would like roll over, and the soldiers would fall down, and he'd get all mad at her. Anyway, the thing what I find Catherine the Great's life inspiring because, as the years were passing, and she was a good person. She learned Russian. And she had all this time on her hand. Her husband neglected her. She read a lot of books. She became a very knowledgeable person, and she treated people well. The people that she encountered, she was in the royal family, so people liked her. And she learned the Russian language. And then, as the czar, the reigning czar, was getting older, Paul, her husband, was actually planning to have her put in a convent after he became czar. He was not going to have her on the throne with him because he didn't love her. He had another woman he was interested in, but he couldn't, divorce her because while the father was alive, his father. So, anyway, she found out what was going on, that she would be put in a convent and maybe killed, And so when the crisis came, when the Tsar died and when Paul ascended the throne, there was this, Russian politics is always Byzantine, a lot of scheming and intriguing because you don't have, it's not democracy, but people still have political conniving. Anyway, during the moment of crisis, she made a power play, and she was not going to just accept, being murdered or put in a convent for the rest of her life. So she fought for power, and she won. And she had Paul executed, murdered, and she became the leader of Russia. Incredible. Here she's a foreigner. She's a German. Now the reason she succeeded, because she had learned Russian and she'd become knowledgeable. She read a lot. And so people were impressed by her, and she was good. People liked her. So she had friends. And her husband, everyone hated him because he was lazy, he was cruel, he was no good. So anyway, she won this power struggle and became the leader of Russia for more than 30 years. And the thing is, this is the late 1700s. It was the time of the Enlightenment, which changed the world. The Enlightenment, when really education and intellectuals and educated people in Europe were really dedicated to learning. And this really led to the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, which brought tremendous economic changes, and then which led to really the 20th century and the modern world. It starts in the mind, the human mind. And before this, there was a lot of ignorance, and anyway, so there was a lot of people interested in learning and changing the world, making the world better. And of course, the United States actually was sort of a product of the Enlightenment thinking. Enlightenment thinkers who wanted to learn and to make things and to have and make the world better. And the thing is, intellect, intellectuals like artists, they need sponsors. Who's going to support them? If you're if you're reading books all day and learning, you're not making money, so you need somebody who will support you. And Catherine the Great became the greatest supporter of the Renaissance, of Renaissance thinkers. In fact, Diderot, who wrote the first encyclopedia, and he was having financial problems as an older man. And so she bought his entire library to help him because he was going to sell. And then she said, on one condition, that you keep your library till the end of your life. Wow, what a deal! What an amazing. So she was kind, So because she wanted him to continue to learn, and because he was a great intellectual, great educated person, and dedicated to education, like Thomas Jefferson, who was affected by the Enlightenment. So it was a wonderful, amazing thing that she did. Yeah, and again, she was sponsoring people who were learning, and although there were limits to that because it really led to a movement for democracy, which she was against because she was a dictator, she was a queen, a czarina, an empress. But an amazing person, Catherine the Great. Really inspiring. Just shows whatever you're going through in life, whatever hardships you're going through, be a good person and make use of your time every day. Time is precious. Let's not waste time. Let's keep learning and growing and be good. Be good people. Treat others well, and eventually good things will come. And she's a good example of that. That when the opportunity came, she was prepared, and she was a wonderful leader of Russia. And in fact, she built this famous statue of Peter the Great. And when they're in St. Petersburg in the Second World War, when the Germans were bombing what was they called Leningrad then, they spared that statue, maybe because a German had it built. What an inspiration, Catherine the Great, incredible. And she's one of the great people in history because her support for the Enlightenment and Enlightenment thinkers, led to the world we have today, which we're a much better world, and all the progress we've had since then, because it all starts in the human mind. Wonderful. And she also established a tremendous art collection. She bought a lot of art in Great Britain, and where the British just wouldn't. A lot of our famous art ended up in Russia because of her. She found out this art was for sale, and the English apparently couldn't come up with the money to keep it. What an incredible life, Catherine the Great. Okay, Lucy Maud Montgomery. They used to call her L.M. She used L.M., and she would go by the name of Maud. The author of the Anne of Green Gables series of books. Wonderful, wonderful books. And she made Prince Edward Island famous. And of course, that's an 8-book series, Anne of Green Gables books. She also wrote the Emily of New Moon series and the Pat of Silverbush, two-book series. But mostly it's, in Lakeside, Ohio, they have Green Gables, which is a reference to Anne of Green Gables. And of course, Anne of Green Gables I think her name was Anne Shirley. She was this orphan girl that was adopted by this middle-aged brother and sister. And just, it's fiction, but Anne of Green Gables has such a wonderful spirit, wonderful, good person, and, joy of living. And she'd been through hardships. She's a very inspiring character. When I go to Lakeside, Ohio, and go into the Hotel Lakeside, the parlor and porch, I consider it a 19th century Anne of Green Gables experience. One of the famous lines is when Anne is talking to her friend, and they're young, and her friend says, "Oh, when I'm old or when I'm rich, I'm going to eat chicken salad and ice cream every day and live in a hotel." And Anne says, "Oh, I think we already are rich because we're young, we have youth." Wonderful spirit, good person. Fighting spirit. Apparently inspired a lot of the Japanese because of the hardships they went through after the Second World War, the war itself. And so, Anne of Green Gables, this girl had a hard life growing up as an orphan, and finally was in a good family, good and really wonderful person. Very very endearing. Very happy and very interested in learning and good, wonderful. So Lucy Maud Montgomery, she's created Anne of Green Gables. Cory Aquino, Corazon or Cory Aquino, 1933 to 2009, the Philippines. Cory Aquino's husband was Ninoy Aquino, or Benigno Ninoy Aquino, and he should have been president of the Philippines in 1973, I believe. But Ferdinand Marcos, who was elected twice, 65 and 69, he became a dictator and had Ninoy Aquino arrested. So Cory Aquino's husband was she was just she was a housewife, good person. Her husband was arrested. She had 5 kids, really hard. And then, she didn't know if he was gonna be executed because, Nino, her husband, was a threat to Ferdinand Marcos's power. And then eventually Marcos had Aquino and his family go into exile to get him out of the country for a number of years in Boston. And then Nino wanted to go back. He thought, I wonder if he wanted to go back to the Philippines. He felt like, I've got to go back. And I wonder if he thought people had forgotten him. And when he went back, I think in 1983, he was shot and killed at the airport. Didn't even get off the airplane, shot and killed, and terrible. So Cory Aquino's husband was murdered, and then this led really to the revolution, a people power revolution against the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos and the restoration of democracy. And Cory Aquino led that. Very inspiring. Yeah, they had the news got out that he was wondering if people had forgotten him, and so they had these. They tied yellow ribbons around different places to, like the song, "Tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree. It's been 3 long years. Do you still love me?" So this wonderful song, 1,000 yellow. So this wonderful story, and it led to the yellows being adopted by the political party that Cory Aquino founded. And eventually, in 1986, they had the end game where people massed at by the corner of Ortigas Boulevard and the EDSA Highway, and there was a defection among the military. 2 generals, Fidel Ramos and Johnny Enrile, and then eventually, the army defected to this movement. And they abandoned Marcos, and then so democracy was restored. And so she served as president from 1986 to 1992. Yeah, and people were disappointed. The expectations were way too high for her and her government. But and they thought, because government's tough and democracy's tough. Dictatorship's kind of easy. You just do what the dictator says. But in democracy, you have to. There was a lot of suppressed things in the Philippines. So she had a lot of headaches as president. But the thing is, it's a tough job. Anybody who's a political leader has a tough job, and she did too. But she finished her term. She actually had a couple times military trouble with the army and potential coup d'etat. Anyway, she finished her term. Her son, Noynoy, I was a big supporter. He was overly supportive of him. He was elected in 2010 until 2016. Noynoy Aquino, her son. So Cory Aquino, and she inspired, this was an inspiration all over the world. People were inspired by her courage, and they used nonviolence. And you had the pictures of these nuns with facing tanks and holding flowers out to the soldiers, and very wonderful. And praying, praying the rosary and praying. And it was a very spiritual thing, wonderful. And this was inspired people all over the world to fight for justice and to fight against dictatorships, because countries need to be democratic so that governments can be accountable, and we need to work things out. Dictatorships have to go. That's the old days. We have to, and it's not easy. But anyway, Cory Aquino, very inspiring person in world history. Wonderful. Golda Meir, 1898 to 1978. She was born in Kiev, Ukraine. Her family moved to the United States. She became the Prime Minister of Israel from 1969 to 1974. One of the things about Israel, it was a new country, a Jewish state established in large part because of the Holocaust, when 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazi Germany. But Golda Meir, I think it was established in 1948, around that time, and not long after the war, and as a Jewish state, a place for the Jewish people where they felt they could be safe, because oh my God, they thought they were good citizens in Europe, and then they got rounded up, terrible. And they said, you're a bunch of cowards, because they couldn't serve in the military. So anyway, Israel is controversial because it seems like the Muslim world is against them and their existence. Yeah, and up till now, the country Iran is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. So if you say you're a supporter of Israel, then you might have trouble. Muslims say, "Hey, that's terrible," because they're against Israel. Anyway, one of the things the Israelis did is they were for they were idealistic and they wanted women to have equal rights, and they did. And so this was unusual in the 40s. That she was back in the 40s, she was a leader of a country. Golda Meir, and she was an older woman, really did a good job. Very inspiring woman, Golda Meir. Okay, Indira Gandhi, she was from 1917 to 1984, India. She was Prime Minister of India from 1966 to 77, from 1980 to 1984. Yeah, her father, I believe, was Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of independent India after India became independent, after the British left. And now her family, I believe her father was prime minister, and then she was the leader, and then her sons were supposed to. One of her sons was killed in an airplane crash. I think one of her sons, she actually was assassinated. I think by a Sikh fellow who had grievances about the status of Sikhs, and her son, I believe, was assassinated. Now and actually her daughter-in-law, who was Italian, Sonia, I believe she became prime minister. And now I think the grandson, I don't think he's the leader, but he's also in politics. Their family was, a prominent family in the Congress Party, I believe. And anyway, yeah, tough job ruling India, because it's, they, especially back in the 60s, they really had severe material poverty. Very spiritual country, lots of different languages, not an easy thing. Plus the big challenge of dealing with Pakistan and that, the Hindu-Muslim conflict, and then especially when India and Pakistan developed nuclear weapons, and there's been a threat since then up till now of nuclear war between India and Pakistan. So Indira Gandhi, another very inspiring woman, leader of a country in Asia. Willa Cather, 1873 to 1947. She was an American author, wrote wonderful books, two of which are My Antonia and O Pioneers. And especially My Antonia is my favorite. She writes about the Great Plains in the late 1800s in the United States. Kansas, Nebraska, that area, the Dakotas, and it's beautiful. They're beautiful, beautiful writing. This about the people, these farmers, and the land. This wide open spaces. Flat lands with very few trees and pretty tough winters, and the lives of farmers, and beautiful books. And she's a wonderful writer, Willa Cather. Okay, Aung San Suu Kyi. She was born in 1947. She's from Burma, and she was her father was the father's name was Aung San, and he was the leader of Burma right when independence came from Great Britain. But he was murdered in a political issue with the military, or by enemies, 1947. So her father actually was, you could say, the father of Burma. Now she married a fellow from Great Britain, and then they had two kids. She was living in Great Britain, and then she was called back. They said, we need you here to fight, because there was a military dictatorship, and she came back to Burma, and since from 1988 up until up until 2016, she was under house arrest. That's a long time, 28 years. And it's very tragic. She really sacrificed a lot, because her husband, was in England, her kids, and then they said if you leave the country, you won't get a visa to come back. And then her husband couldn't get a visa to come. So they were separate, and he died. He was older, he got sick and died. That was very tragic. And her two sons grew up without a mother. They were younger. So this is very tough. Big sacrifice she made. And then, of course, she became a president, or she was elected president in 2016. And she shares power, I believe, with the military, and she won the Nobel Prize. She's been condemned by people because they've had this. Burma borders Bangladesh, which has a much larger population, which is very, very materially poor and Muslim. And there are Muslim minorities group in Burma, and there was where the army had killed. Some of them were killed, and then she was condemned for keeping quiet. And, it's a tough, I don't know, politics. As I say, politics is the art of the possible. There's only so much you can do, or they say you can only do so much. And, I'm not gonna condemn her. And the thing is, it's obviously wrong when people are murdered or killed. And Bangladesh has a huge population, very, very poor materially. And so there's concern about them coming into the country. And you have refugees, and plus Bangladesh is connected to the international Muslim community, which has been somewhat problematic. But so I don't condemn her for that. I don't know but it kind of reminds me of Cory Aquino in the Philippines, where there was all this disappointment with her, things she didn't. You do what you can, and as I said, I believe she shares power in Burma. And anyway, very inspiring life. Not sure if I have the pronunciation right. Aung San Suu Kyi, Aung. Four names in her name. Aung, and then San Suu and Kyi. Very inspiring woman. Margaret Thatcher, 1925 to 2013, Great Britain. She was Prime Minister of Great Britain from 1979 to 1990. Yes, she actually prosecuted the Falkland Islands War with Argentina. Falkland Islands was and still is a British colony way down south, going toward the Antarctica. These islands off the coast of Argentina, and the Argentine military that tried to distract attention, they went in and took it over, and she fought, and she prosecuted that war and won, defeated the Argentines. So I'm sure she's not popular in Argentina today. Anyway, she was a conservative. Great Britain had gone really far into the socialist government, and there was all kinds of problems because of the economy was really in decline. And if you're a liberal, I think the leftist liberals really hate her, the conservatives like her. And anyway, she's a very strong woman, and she was supportive of the Gulf War when Iraq invaded, Saddam Hussein and Iraq invaded Kuwait. She and George Bush Sr. were the leaders, she supported George Bush in that war. Margaret Thatcher, very strong woman. Okay, Hillary Clinton, 1947 up till now. Of course, Hillary Clinton her husband she was First Lady for 8 years. Her husband Bill was elected in 1982 U.S. President. She served as First Lady for 8 years. And she was kind of a co-president at that time. She was very much involved. Very political woman. Very much involved in the campaigns and in his administration. And she wasn't just, like a traditional housewife, you could say. And she was Secretary of State, so she had for President Barack Obama, very, in charge of American foreign policy all over the world. And she was the first woman to be nominated by one of the two major parties in the United States when she got the Democratic Party's nomination for president. Of course, was defeated by Donald Trump in the election, and really disappointed women all over the world. But again, she's a very inspiring woman, very, very strong personality, very brave and smart, really inspiring. Still a very inspiring life. Okay, Martha Washington, 1732 to 1802, the wife of George Washington. Yeah, they call her the secret weapon in the American Revolution during the dark days. A lot of hard times. Especially, the famous winter at Valley Forge, when the soldiers fighting for American independence were freezing and starving. And, they said George Washington kept up the spirits of the troops, and she kept up his spirits. But she also, every winter, she spent with the army and meeting with and tending to the wounded. So she was a very important for morale is important. And a lot of people in the American Revolution were very depressed because it went on, it dragged on, and it was very tough. Fighting in Great Britain was tough. And of course, she also served as First Lady. She was a very, very good woman, and she and her George really loved each other. So she was an amazing person. Queen Elizabeth, born in 1926, she's still the Queen. She was of Great Britain. She was coronated in 1953. So 47, so that's like 66 years. Yeah, man, long time. She was a big hero of my mother, who's gone now. But yeah, so back in the 50s, I think she's in her 90s. She's 91, 1926, or something like that. In her 90s, still on the throne. Partly because Charles, was divorced, and that made it. She probably would have turned over power to him by now, but since he was divorced, he divorced Lady Diana. I guess they say it's going to go to the grandson, Queen Elizabeth, the symbol of Great Britain. Evita Peron, or Eva Peron, 1919 to 1952. She was the First Lady of Argentina from 1946 to 1952. Of course, her husband, Juan Peron, was elected president. And she's controversial. Of course, she became really famous because of the Broadway musical and also the movie with Madonna. Don't cry for me, Argentina. For I'm ordinary, unimportant, and undeserving of such affection, unless we all are, I think we all are. Ride on my train, oh my people, and when it's your turn to die, they'll remember they fired those cannons, sang lamentations, not just for Eva, for Argentina, not just for Eva, for everybody. She came from a poor family, and I think got into acting, and she died young. She got cancer and died. Yeah, so that was, and the people were very upset. His like all politics is controversial, and of course her role and her husband's role is I guess it depends on your political persuasion if you're into Argentine politics. But she was young and glamorous, and she traveled to Europe and so forth. And again, she became famous. I guess when you die young, you become more famous. And she had the reputation of being dedicated to the poor and to common people in Argentina because she herself had come from a poor background. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, 1938 to the present. She's still alive. She was the president of Liberia from 2006 to 2018, 12 years. First woman to be head of state of a country in Africa in modern times. And Liberia was this country established by the United States for former slaves or African Americans and in West Africa. And then those people, they called Americo-Liberians, who were American slaves and who moved to and established Liberia. They ruled Liberia for a long, long time, and the local people didn't have power up until, I believe, 1982, when Sam Doe had led a coup d'etat. He was only 28, and this other guy, Taylor. I can't remember this guy. He was an American, well, I think a Liberian American who went back. Then they had a horrendous civil war. Went on and on and on. Finally, that was a horrible civil war, and I think it was in the 90s or something like that. And anyway, so she, I don't know much about her, but it's amazing. She had, again, 12 years in power. And again, if the little that I know about her, I'd love to read a biography of her, that, there was all this disappointment with her. But that's just how it is. That's how politics is. You're not, and especially a country of all the things they've been through, all this hardships and, the Civil War was really, really horrible. And so anyway, I'm sure she did her best. And everything I've heard about her, what are you going to do? She was in a tough did a tough job. But again, another inspiring person, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Mary Shelley, 1797 to 1851. When she was she was from England. And Great Britain. And as a young lady, she was with her friends in Switzerland on vacation. And, this is before TV, and people had to entertain themselves. A lot of things, they'd like to tell storytelling. Let's tell ghost stories, and you make up stories. She made up a story, and her friend said, "Wow, that's an amazing story. You should write it down." And she did, and it was published as the book Frankenstein, probably the greatest horror novel of all time, the greatest horror character, and a wonderful story. You have this guy, Victor Frankenstein, who creates a monster or creates a human from body parts, but then abandons the monster because he gets sick, and then he feels kind of disgusted with it. This poor fella has a hard time going through. He's been abandoned by his creator. Unlike us, unlike human beings, God has not abandoned us. But Victor did abandon. That's why he ended up having all these trouble. He didn't know what was going on, and then he became kind of angry and violent. So Mary Shelley, the creator of this, there's been so many movies, and probably my favorite monster when I was growing up. Marie Sklodowska Curie, or Madame Curie, 1867 to 1934. She was born in Poland, then moved to France. She was a physicist and a chemist. She researched radioactivity. First woman to win the Nobel Prize. And she's also the first woman to be entombed in the Pantheon. I guess you have to be a hero. So tremendous scientists, Madame Curie. Don't know much more about her than that. But yeah, they have, in fact, here in the Polish garden at the Cleveland Cultural Gardens, they have a bust of her. So really tremendous. All this work she did in physics, chemistry, and studying radioactivity. Marie Sklodowska, Madame Curie. Amelia Earhart, 1897 to 1937, the first woman to make a solo airplane flight across the Atlantic Ocean. And she disappeared in the Pacific Ocean near Howland Island. Tragic, yeah. I know she was here in Cleveland for the air races, stayed at the, here in Rocky River at the Westlake Hotel. And Amelia Earhart, she's depicted in the movies, these Night at the Museum movies, and tremendous famous female aviator. Amelia Earhart. Ann Tyler, born in 1941, still alive. She's an American author, written a number of wonderful books. Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant, which I really enjoyed. Breathing Lessons, The Accidental Tourist, Saint Maybe, I also enjoyed that, and Patchwork Planet. At the dinner at the Homesick Restaurant, you go in there and they decide what you need and to eat. It's kind of funny. Saint Maybe, where this guy is mocking a guy who's trying to be a good guy. He says, "What are you, Saint Maybe?" Wonderful author of novels, Ann Tyler. Benazir Bhutto, 1953 to 1977, Pakistan. She was prime minister from 1988 to 1990 and 1993 to 1996. Her father was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was prime minister, and he was executed in 1979. Yeah, so she was kind of the daughter trying to continue the legacy of her father, who was murdered for political reasons, and then she herself, I believe, was murdered. And I believe the only woman to become a leader of a Muslim country. I might be wrong about that, but one of the very few. Benazir Bhutto, yeah, very, very brave woman. She came back from exile and I think was murdered. Florence Nightingale, 1820 to 1910, England. She's the founder of modern nursing. Yeah, this is such an important field, nursing, because part of, the doctors, they come and go. They're not around that much, but the nurses do so much, and so very important in the development of better medical care, because if you look back in time, the medical care was so horrible. Lady Diana, or Diana Spencer, 1961 to 1997. She didn't live that long, only like 36 years. She married Prince Charles in the British royal family in 1981. They got divorced in 1996. Very tragic. Everybody loved Prince Diana. She was very beautiful. She developed depression, and she and Charles had marital problems. It was a shame that they couldn't work things out and they were divorced, and that she died. People felt really bad about her death. And then Elton John wrote a famous song, Candle in the Wind, in her memory. Lady Diana Spencer. Queen Victoria of Great Britain, 1819 to 1901. She was Queen of Great Britain for more than 60 years. Yeah, in fact, this was the height of the British Empire. One of the people my grandmother, who was from England, really admired. Queen Victoria. Cleopatra, 69 BC to 30 BC, so didn't live very long. In Egypt, famous Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. Yeah, and I believe she was the last Egyptian leader before Egypt was taken over by the Roman Empire. And she was trying to, Egyptian politics was really cutthroat, and she was dealing with the Roman Empire, trying to keep the independence of Egypt, and was involved with powerful men like Mark Antony, who was a powerful Roman politician. Cleopatra. Frida Kahlo, 1907 to 1954. She was from Mexico, famous artist. Yeah, a friend of mine, Brent Lesheim. I got these finger dolls, and they sell these at books, half-price books, and have a bunch of them on the refrigerator. And I thought, what is this? She had very dark eyebrows, and she was kind of a unconventional person. She was married to Diego Rivera, who was a famous artist. Frida Kahlo. She got involved in the communist movement in Mexico. Very interesting woman, wonderful painter, artist. Louisa May Alcott, 1832 to 1888, the famous author of Little Women and the sequels Little Men and Joe's Boys. Wonderful book, Little Women. It's a beautiful story of these four sisters in the United States during the end of the Civil War and afterward. And then the sequels, wonderful book. They came out with a new movie, new version of Little Women. I used to tell my father, I said, yeah, they have updated version of Little Women is Small Broads. Hope that doesn't offend anybody, but he used to laugh about that. Harriet Beecher Stowe, 1811 to 1896, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. This really changed history because it depicted the hardships of slaves and this famous character, Uncle Tom. It's too bad that Uncle Tom now is like a derogatory word, because my memory is in the book he was a very noble man, patient and had to endure and so forth. But this book really was an inspiration for the abolition movement in the United States, and actually a step toward the Civil War, when we had to fight it out and were able to defeat the North was able to defeat the South and end slavery. And this was Abraham Lincoln met her, and he said, "So this is the lady who started the Civil War." So this was important because slavery was a national shame. Sonja Henie, 1912 to 1969. She was from Norway, a figure skater and film star, Olympic champion, Sonja Henie. Alice Roosevelt Longworth, 1884 to 1980, the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt. She lived in Washington. Her father was president, Theodore Roosevelt, and she lived in Washington, D.C. pretty much her entire life, and was very much involved in Washington politics, although she herself never ran, but she was an important player. Her husband was a senator. She knew everybody, and she had influence for a long, long time in Washington, D.C. and the U.S. national politics. Sue Miller, 1943 to still alive. She's an American author, and she wrote the book Family Pictures, a wonderful novel. I thought it was incredible, about an American family over time. It's just so interesting, I find, because that's what life is. You're in a family, and things change. I thought she did such a good job of changing the characters. Aging in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. This family reminded me a lot of my own family. Diane Fossey, 1932 to 1985. She was a great lover of the mountain gorillas in East Africa and spent the years 1966 to 1985 studying them and learning, making friends with them. Really interesting. And she always was. She was forever having trouble getting her visa renewed in Rwanda. She finally, met the president of Rwanda, got like a 5-year visa. She was happy. And then she was murdered shortly after that. Very tragic. Because I guess there were poachers, there's severe material poverty in Rwanda. Of course, they had the awful civil war. And she, and these poachers, I think were, capturing guerrillas. And so she was in conflict. That may have been one of the reasons she died or was murdered. And she also was kind of a difficult person. She was, and not a traditional woman, but really interesting life, studying the mountain gorillas of East Africa. Billie Jean King, 1943, she's still alive, tennis champion. She was involved in the famous 1973 tennis match called the Battle of the Sexes against Bobby Riggs. I remember as a boy growing up. And so Billie Jean King, tremendous tennis player. Violeta Chamorro, born in 1929, still alive. She was president of Nicaragua. And from 1990 to 1997, actually after the Sandinistas had communist government in Nicaragua, and she became the you could say a conservative leader. I think the only woman to become president of Nicaragua. Again, Latin America is a pretty traditional culture, so that was really something. And finally, Pocahontas, 1596 to 1617, only lived 21 years. She was the famous Powhatan American Indian in Virginia, who saved the life of John Smith, which was very important because John Smith was the most competent person at the early days of the English colony in Virginia. They had a lot of guys who didn't know anything, who were lazy, and so just rich guys hoping to become richer from finding gold. And a lot of them died because they didn't know how to do anything or wouldn't work. And John Smith was a hard worker and knew a lot, and she saved his life. And then she married another Englishman, John Rolfe, traveled to England, and then died. She was, the Indians didn't have immunities to the various European diseases, so she died. And during the Donald Trump Elizabeth Warren, who's a strong candidate for the next U.S. president, I think is coming up next year. She has part American Indian background, and she lets people know she's part Indian, and Donald Trump refers to her as Pocahontas. I don't think she likes that, but And of course, the famous Disney movie, Pocahontas, wonderful movie, Pocahontas, which shows, the two worlds coming together when Europeans came and encountered American Indians. Okay, so that's the story. There's a lot more. This is just a few of the famous women that I know about and that I look up to. I think are really inspiring and made significant contributions to the world. And there are many, many more. Just the beginning. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.